Everyone, let's solve the PYQs of Phillips curve for UGC NET. December 2013. It is often true that as the economy begins to recover from a recession, the unemployment rate rises because as the economy initially recovers from a recession, the demand for goods and services falls. This is not true. As the economy begins to recover from a recession, workers who were previously discouraged about their chances of finding a job begin to look for work again. Does not happen so fast. As the economy begins to recover from a recession because the errors in the way the data are collected, not a great answer. As the economy initially recovers from a recession, firms don't immediately increase the number of workers they hire. Firms wait to hire more individuals until they are convinced that the recovery is strong. This looks correct because that is true. No firm rushes to hire more workers. So this answer is D. Let's go to the next question. Which among the following were neglected by Keynes in his theory of employment? Expectations, capital stock, consumption, government. So definitely not government consumption. Capital stock, you can say it is more a demand-sided theory, but expectations was a big one, which is kind of ignored. So out of those two options, I would choose A more than B. So this was December 2014. Let's go to the next question. An increase in fiscal spending leads to. So increase in fiscal spending would basically mean that your aggregate demand curve has shifted out. Now, when aggregate demand shifts out, there is a movement along the Phillips curve, right? So if you do it diagrammatically, if this is the Phillips curve, then as aggregate demand shifts out, temporarily you move to, let's say if you're at point B, you move to from point A, you move to point B. So there is no shift in the Phillips curve. There's a movement along the Phillips curve such that unemployment rises, inflation also rises, such that unemployment falls, inflation rises. So unemployment is falling because this is U here. That falls and inflation rises. So D is the right answer for June 2019. All right, next question, 2012. Which of the following is not a feature of A.W. Phillips inflation unemployment trade-off relation? A non-linear inverse relationship between unemployment and the rate of change in wage rate. That is exactly what A.W. Phillips said, so that's not the answer. There's a loop anti-clockwise around the Phillips curve. Actually, he did say this, that there is a loop anti-clockwise which is going around the Phillips curve. The wage inflation unemployment relationship is predictable. So that was the conclusion of the Phillips curve, that actually you can predict the wage inflation relationship. The Phillips curve shifts when expected inflation shifts. This A.W. Phillips did not say. This was actually added later by Friedman and Phelps. So Phillips did not say this. So D is the right answer because this was added later on. Let's move on to the next question. A.W. Phillips wage inflation unemployment trade-off is based on static expectation, adaptive expectation, extrapolative expectation, and rational. So static meaning prices will never change. That is not true because there is inflation. Extrapolative, we can ignore. Rational also not. So adaptive is the one, which is the common one and which is what Phillips curve was based on. So that is adaptive expectations. Let's go on to the next question. The negative relationship between the gap between actual GDP and its trend value and the difference between actual unemployment rate and its equilibrium value is called. So the negative relationship between the gap between actual GDP and its trend value, between actual unemployment rate and its equilibrium value is called. So this is the relationship between output gap and employment gap, and that is given to us by Okun's law, because aggregate supply is price and output, Phillips curve is inflation unemployment, and the natural rate of unemployment hypothesis is about the natural rate. So Okun's law talks about this. It's the gap between GDP gap and unemployment gap. All right, let's look at the next question. Which of the following is not a characteristic feature of the Phillips curve? The price expectations are adaptive. The unemployment rate when money wage stabilizes is 5.5%. Price expectations are static, and there is a loop around the Phillips curve. Um, so price expectations are adaptive and price expectations are static. So both cannot be. Price expectations are adaptive. So A has to be. Not a feature would be C, that price expectations are static. That's not a feature. All right, let's go on to the next question. In context of monetary policy, the sacrifice ratio refers to. So sacrifice ratio is that if there are two choices, whether you want to, if there's output growth, there's to be some inflation. And if you want to reduce inflation, then there's going to be some sacrifice of output. So it's the loss of output in reducing inflation. So output cost of reducing inflation, C will be the right answer for sacrifice ratio. Next question, which one of the following is the correct concept of natural rate of unemployment? So natural rate of unemployment, definitely B, C, and D we will eliminate because cyclical unemployment is not natural rate of unemployment. Uh, Frictional and structural unemployment can be natural rate. So that's a more permanent form of unemployment, frictional and structural. Cyclical is something that comes and goes. So that is not natural rate. So the answer is A. Next, Phillips curve sets up a relationship between. So, is it taxes and inflation, inflation, unemployment, money wage? So, it has to be inflation and unemployment. That is B. Let's look at the next question. If the actual unemployment rate is below the natural rate of unemployment, it would be expected that. So, if the actual unemployment rate is below the natural rate, it would be expected that. So, this is again, if you go to the Phillips curve, this is the Phillips curve. So if the actual is below the natural, then you're going to have inflation. So the rate of inflation would increase. So A should be the right answer. All right, let's go to the next question. Which among the following is not a characteristic of stagflation? So stagflation is high inflation, and there is also unemployment, right? So there is high inflation, there's unemployment, there's low growth, and high employment is not correct. So the right answer, not a characteristic, is high employment, is low employment. All right, let's move on to the next question. If economic agents perfectly anticipate policy changes, and if all prices, including wages, are completely flexible, which of the following is true? So in the long run, if everything is anticipated, then there will be no trade-off in inflation and unemployment, and it's going to be a vertical line. So A is going to be the right answer for that. All right, next question. Consider the following statements. Phillips curve is an inverse relationship between the natural rate of unemployment and the rate of inflation in an economy. Okay, so Phillips curve is an inverse relationship between the rate of unemployment and the rate of inflation. So that is true. Engel's law observes that as income rises, the proportion of income spent on food falls, even if the actual expenditure on food rises. That is true because you can't keep how much can you spend on food initially. So both A and B are true. So C is the right answer. Let's move on to the next question. The relationship described by the expectations augmented Phillips curve is correct in which of the following? So expectations augmented Phillips curve, long run, short run, in the short run and in the long run, neither. So in expectation augmented Phillips curve is the regular Phillips curve with added supply shock and added expected expected inflation. So that is true in the short run because in the long run, Phillips curve is vertical. So only in the short run do we have the expectations augmented Phillips curve. So 48 is B. Then next question is on NIRU. Non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment means a rate of unemployment for which the change in the rate of inflation is zero. that is actually correct. A rate of inflation which makes the rate of unemployment can never be zero. Um, a rate of inflation for which the change in the rate of unemployment is zero, no. So it is the rate of a rate of unemployment for which the change in inflation is zero. So inflation is positive, but it is just not changing. So A is actually the right answer, and the rest are incorrect definitions of NITO. Okay. Under which of the following approaches Phillips curve analysis holds good? Um, Adaptive, rational. So under which of the following approaches Phillips curve analysis holds? The rational expectation part, of course, there's no trade-off. The Phillips curve analysis does not hold, so only an adaptive expectation. So that is only A. A is the right answer. Next question. What type of relationship the Phillips curve postulates between the rate of unemployment and the rate of increase of money wages? Inverse, direct, direct and proportional, inverse and proportional. So definitely not direct. So now between inverse and inverse and proportional, so we do think that Phillips curve is one straight line, but the relationship is actually, it's not to be said that it's actually a perfectly proportional relationship like we have, an MPC and it's fixed. It's not fixed like that. So the relationship, what was important when the Phillips curve was discovered was that this is when A.W. Phillips noticed data, he noticed that the data was something like this. So it wasn't, you could fit a trend line to it, which we did with the Phillips curve, but it is not necessarily a proportional relationship. So the more correct answer is inverse, not inverse and proportional. All right, let's go to the next question. All right, so in this question we have a bunch of equations and we have to match them. So let's look for the easiest ones to do. So Phillips curve. Phillips curve is between inflation and unemployment. We don't have unemployment here, but we have inflation and output. So output can be converted into unemployment. So I'm guessing C should be 2. Now C is 2 is only in option C. So thankfully C should be the right answer. Let's see what else can we do easily. Dynamic IS curve. So IS curve is a relationship between Y and R. So that is also only one option. So D should be 1, which is in 3 options. So um, that is done. So now we are left with central bank loss function and monetary rule. So central bank loss, I don't know what that is. So I think, but that is enough. So the answer is C for here. All right, so that's it for the questions of UGC NET for Phillips curve. All right, let's solve questions on rational expectations. Which of the following statements about rational expectations is false? It implies that the expected changes in demand have no effect on unemployment. It assumes that people take into account all information. This is true. It assumes that on average, the forecasts made by the public are correct because it takes in all information. So this is also true. It implies that the unexpected changes in demand have long-lasting effects on both unemployment and the price level. So unexpected changes in demand can actually have a lasting effect on the price level. Unemployment, though, no, because unemployment comes back to the long run. Option 8 implies that the expected changes in demand have no effect on unemployment. That is also true because expected changes should have no effect because that should already be factored in. So A should also not be true. So A is also true actually. So the false part is only this unemployment. That unexpected change in demand have a long-lasting effect on unemployment. That is false because it always comes back to the natural rate. So the right answer is D. Right, next question. The rational expectation, the hypothesis suggests that the forecast that people make concerning future inflation rates. So future inflation rates and rational expectations are random because all available information is already incorporated. So consistently overestimates the actual rate of inflation in the future. It's not incorrect. Rational expectation is correct. Are always correct. It is only subject to some changes because it is only today's information which has been incorporated, but future changes are not always incorporated. So you cannot say they're always correct. Consistently underestimates the actual rate of inflation. There is no consistent in this because it is random. The deviations are random, are correct on an average, but are subject to errors that are distributed randomly. So that is correct. D is the right answer. All right, question 60. Consider the following statements about the rational expectations model. Monetary policy cannot affect output and employment. So output and employment is at full employment always. So this is true. Unanticipated changes will not affect real variables in the very short run. Okay. There is equilibrium in the markets, of course. Economic agents will use all relevant information to form their expectations. So definitely D is true. There is equilibrium in the markets, of course. What about option B? Unanticipated changes will not affect real variables in the very short run. Very short run would mean now in terms of option B, unanticipated changes will actually it will affect real variables only in the very short run and not in the long run. So B is actually not correct. So A, C, and D are correct. So the answer is A. Let's move on to the next question. Rational expectations views include. Okay, the market clearing rational expectations do not approach the Phillips curve. Okay. The market clearing rational expectations do not approach the Phillips curve. It's market clearing if you take it as that rational expectations are in the long run and Phillips curve is in the short run. If you take it as like that, then A is incorrect. Rational expectations is the theory of expectations, of course. An emphasis on the credibility of all policymakers, of course. A preference for policy making rules rather than discretion. Right. Generally insist that markets do not clear rapidly. There's nothing like that. D is okay. It is rules make it credible. So B, C, and D are credible. So A should be the right answer. And that covers rational expectations.